All right, thank you both so much. Those were absolutely tremendous papers. We now have time for questions. We have about 15 minutes. So yeah, we can start fielding questions. And I'll just start with, I want to ask you both about the sort of implicit, maybe positive project sustained through both of your critiques of system theory, right? And whether it is simply a matter of returning to the old materialism against the new materialism, so to speak, or if this return to ideology critique, psychoanalysis, sort of Marxist critique, has to maintain or take something new from systems theory or its surrounding discourses. So, for example, Harper, maybe that's necropolitics for you, or Eddie, maybe. I don't know if there is one for you, actually. I don't know. Does that question make sense? Does that bring anything to mind?
Okay, I can say something. Yeah, no, I mean, that's an excellent question, and in many ways, like a question I'm still trying to work through. It's my temptation, certainly, to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? So I'm very much like, in an earlier version of this paper, I was like, systems thinking can never offer a liberatory epistemology. Like, and I have been wary in the past of, what the language of like, as important as kind of language of like systemic oppression or like matrices of domination that you get in Churchill Collins, like as important as those interventions are, I just worry about the language of systems. And I think that worry is probably a little bit unfounded. But I've been encouraged by my advisors of late to try and think through, like and I think this is such a like a felicitous pairing, Eddie and me, because I've been using kind of Lacan and like their, theories of like the kind of failure of relationships, or the kind of like imminent, non-relation at the heart of the social, to offer a kind of critique of the ascendancy of relationality in systems thinking. And I've been encouraged to try and find that kind of locus of negativity, or a kind of this kind of like ontological gap in the language of systems itself. And I'm very resistant to doing that, but I've been told it's possible. So perhaps one day I will, develop a more generous orientation towards systems thinking, but not today.
Yeah, I'm going to have to second Harper's point here, but I like the way you formulated the question too, Nick, because you're saying that there's a sort of critical or negative project here. What's the positive point? And we could go the route of within the sort of Lacanian sphere of literature, where there's Laclau, Zizek, whatever, affirming the antagonism at the heart of the social. I'm only putting this sort of cynical sounding way because I take it that you guys are familiar with the topic. But that being said, this is extremely provisional, so I'm just throwing it out there. Where my sort of interest in the topic has gone is actually away from the question of system theory as much into like almost like religious studies or something like this, because it seems to me that the idea of secularism as a sort of conceiving of the state, for example, as a sort of neutral vessel or neutral totality that encompasses all particular views without accounting for this whole itself, or only accounting for it in an abstract sense, you might say, is kind of the direction it goes next. Maybe if you follow the contradictions of systems theory, because what it seems to me they really can't grasp is that, like, for example, the sort of input of this Schelling stuff, that like segregation as a particular moment is incarnate in the machine. We encounter this a lot in a lot of like very bad ideologies that are the sort of like prehistory or the background of where our particular machines and technology were formed. But I'd kind of been in the search for like, what's the first moment where's the fall? Like, where did this all go wrong? When did this happen? But I wonder if it's actually something of like a more conflictual logic in sort of imaginary space of like religious conflict. Particularly, I've been spending a lot of time looking at like the Protestant Reformation and how they formulate critiques of each other from Catholic and Protestant respectively, from these sort of what we call today like fundamentalist positions, but there's no shared space between them. As such, for us like secular readers of it, it's very interesting, as the reasoning can be quite odd and dialectical and cool sometimes. But
yeah, that's fantastic. So we have a question here in the chat from Samasa Boko. Harper, I was really tuned into your talk because when you mentioned swarm, I was brought instantly to Kant and then to how Fred Moten is thinking about the swarm as a grammar for Black sociality, or how Jared Sexton writes about Africanized bees. More generally, can you talk about the utility of natural metaphors? Do they break down? Can they be provisionally useful?
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, first, the Kant bit, it's every kind of popular press book on complexity or systems thinking is like, did you know that Kant coins the term self-organization in the third critique? I think it was the third, and there's like someone wrote a book called Kant's Organicism that tried to make the claim that like Kant was deeply sympathetic to a kind of like Stalian animist vitalism. And I don't work on Kant. I'm not totally sure where I fall on that argument, but it is interesting that like he's kind of consistently invoked by like systems biologists to be like, he's on our side. I'm not familiar with Fred Moten's work on swarming. I should definitely look into that. One thing I think is, one thing I find really useful about, so a kind of like related term to swarm, because swarming is a kind of systems model for me, a lot of the kind of contemporary plasticity discourse traffics in these ideas as well. A lot of the work on plasticity relies on kind of systems concepts. And Fred Moten has a really interesting critique of Catherine Malibu and the way that she uses the concept of plasticity to open onto a kind of like, you know, more democratic imaginary, or like a more, you know, a more like pluralistic, you know, social sphere. And he kind of chides this pluralistic, or sorry, this the concept of plasticity as it's been taken up in the humanities and in the new materialism, for the way it actually kind of reproduces a Cartesian dualism, where like the plasticity of the brain is like the body is nothing but a kind of like nothing but a kind of prop for this like plastic brain, and how that actually reproduces like a racial difference in the level of the human body, right? Where the body remains racialized, remains kind of insufficiently plastic, insufficiently malleable, and the brain gets to accrue these like concepts of like plasticity and change and like creative evolution. And Kyla Schuller and Jules Jill Peterson just edited a really wonderful issue of Social Text on precisely this problem. So yeah, I should definitely read Moten on swarms, but I find his critique of plasticity like extremely prescient and really helpful for my own thinking. Also not familiar with Jared Sexton on Africanized bees, but I would be really interested to read about that. There's certainly a way in which like epidemics and kind of these outsized figures of catastrophe obviously like accrue to, you know, countries in the global south and become like, you know, racialized animal figures. Can you talk about the utility of natural metaphors? Again, you know, I like to say, no, we don't need natural metaphors. They're always bad. But you know, of course that's not true. And I think that's the more difficult part of this work, right? Like it's, you know, critique is a lot easier than like producing a new set of concepts to think with, right? Than kind of doing something else. So I've done the easy bit, which is say, you know, systems thinking and its use of these kind of natural metaphors of ant colonies or bee swarms, you know, naturalizes segregation and all of these kind of pernicious necropolitical projects. But like, what's, you know, how might we think about that otherwise? I haven't done that yet, and I don't know. So thank you for your question. You know, I'm going to spend the next 3 years trying to answer it.
I wanted to jump in there and comment on it because of the status of metaphor in it, because it always seems to me, Harper, that like so many of these systems theories like collapse metaphor and I don't know, actuality entirely. Like, what are your thoughts on this?
Sorry, can you say that one more time? I was reading the other question in the chat.
Yeah. I was, it always seems to me that like many of the question of metaphor is interesting to me, because so much of the time, one way that I've tried to formulate the issue I have with systems theory is that they don't treat things as metaphors really at all. They like, it's like a human is a bee, is a ant, and like, for example, Alain Badiou gets like really fired up about this. It'll be like, well, if humans are no more than ants, you know, then it's all over, you know, like it's something like this. And but it just seems, it's like, you know, I was thinking when someone had asked about nature metaphors, are they useful? I thought of sort of like in Hegel's phenomenology of spirit, he has some very beautiful metaphors that often collapse the hard line between like artifice and nature, that are actually, I find, quite helpful, or at least like good concepts politically even. But it often seems to me that the systems theorists like toe the line between it being metaphor and then it just being like, this is the way things are across all domains, with the odd caveat that they do compartmentalize things segregationist wise into domains. So I was just curious what you thought about, like, do they really use metaphors, or what's their like relation to it? Because they're all like scientists by trade. So
Right. No, I think you're phrasing that exactly right. Like it's a kind of refusal to take it's a kind of constant invocation of metaphor without actually taking it seriously as metaphor. And maybe this is one way to actually start to answer Samasa's wonderful question, right? The utility of natural metaphors. I think if we take them like maybe what could we say if we actually took these seriously as metaphors? Like what would it mean to think about them as kind of, you know, as provisional, as a kind of like tentative likenings that don't quite line up, instead of as kind of, you know, operative similarities, right? I think the problem with a lot of the kind of, I don't know if we want to call it like the kind of fake metaphor, like the false metaphorization that you get in systems thinking is that those, you know, those similarities become actionable, right? Like you know, projects and concepts are authorized and take place on the grounds that these things are all functionally the same, right? And so in this way, it's obviously a kind of offshoot of cybernetics, right? It's like the ontology of the thing doesn't matter. You know, they display the same behaviors, they're functionally equivalent. Like what can we do if we just assume that all of these things operate the same way? So I think taking metaphor seriously as metaphor might be a way kind of around some of these problems.
Yeah, I think that speaks well to the question that we have in chat as well from Tim Buse. Hey, Tim. A question for both. Does getting rid of systems theory or putting it into question also require getting rid of the subject? I ask this because the fallibility of the system could also be formulated as the limitation of the subject who engages or perceives it. The stability or legibility of the system seems to depend on the identifiability and stability of the subject. So is one implication of your two projects a dispensing, troubling marginalization of the subject as such, or is that one instance of throwing the baby out with the bathwater?
Really quickly, I would say emphatically no. I am interested in a kind of like renewed anthropocentrism, to be completely honest. Like I think systems theory has done away with the human to a detriment, right? Like I think the kind of, it's precisely the refusal to think about the social, to think about the difference, you know, that language, that discourse that jouissance make is responsible for so much of the kind of bad, you know, for so many of the bad metaphors, the kind of operative metaphors you get in systems thinking. So I am invested in the category of the subject as a category that is not reducible to the human either. So thinking about a kind of like properly Lacanian subject, but I think it's precisely the skirting of the subject that has gotten us into the kind of hole that we're in with the ascendancy of systems thinking across the humanities.
I actually wholly agree. I'm sorry to say with what Harper just said. It took the words out of my mouth a bit. I would just add only that it's curious to me that like there's this association of subject and system very often, because I don't often see the concept of the subject invoked in systems theory. Not to be extremely nitpicky about it, but it's often something much more metaphysical than the sort of hard empiricism that they're trying to push in systems theory.
Can I add one more thing?
Absolutely, yeah.
I think one really interesting figure in all of this, who I am hoping to like do more research on, is Jan Smuts, who is a kind of South African statesman, kind of architect of apartheid, and a notable kind of like union buster who was responsible for a lot of like violence committed by the police against striking miners in South Africa. But he wrote this book, Holism and Evolution, and was the first person to kind of coin the term holism. And a lot of like new materialisms and systems thinking are entirely indebted to this book. But he has, and I'm thinking about this because Eddie, you mentioned this kind of like stratification, right? Where like matter is the base level, and then you get like matter, life, consciousness. He has like precisely this kind of hierarchy of holism, right? Where like, you know, matter is the least holistic, and then it goes up, but personality is the pinnacle of it. So the figure of personality has a really weird kind of status in the history of systems thinking, and it is something I would like to think more about. It gets invoked. Jane Bennett talks about personality in interesting ways too, without citing Smuts. So that's food for thought.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you both so much.